Hey, I'm Stephanie Forian, and it's Tech Talk time.
Tech Talk, Tech Talk,
Time to talk tech. Welcome to my web series on the techniques and technology behind the creative process. May is microphone month on my channel, so I thought I would talk about a vintage microphone I had the chance to try. I realize this AKG D19C model has not been in production for a long time, so it might initially seem a little bit irrelevant to discuss, but I don't think it is. Because first of all, there are many working models still on the market today, so if you wanted to find a used one, you still probably could fairly easily. And second of all, it gives me the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things you might want to keep in mind if you're purchasing vintage gear, and also how to figure out if a microphone suits your purposes. One brief housekeeping note before we jump into things. As always with these types of videos, I will include timestamps in the description so you can simply fast forward to the information that's most relevant for you. Let's start by talking about some of the details of this vintage piece. According to the Radio Museum, the D19C model microphone was produced by AKG between 1962 and 1965. It rose to fame at Abbey Road Studios when it was used as an overhead mic to record Ringo's drums. And due to the photographs that were taken during those recording sessions, it came to be known as the Beatles mic. I'll be linking an interview with Lester Smith in the show notes. He was the custodian and maintenance engineer for Abbey Road Studios' historic microphone collection. And so if you're interested in this video, you'll probably want to catch that one as well. But the D19 is at the top of his list due to its versatility and the fact that it's a great sounding dynamic microphone. But he also mentioned that D19s are very fragile, and that's because the coils inside are extremely fine. So buyer beware. These models are not nearly as robust as many of the dynamic mics that we know today. So if you are in the market for one, make sure that you can test it out, see that it works before you put your money down, because these microphones are notoriously difficult to repair. So what features does this microphone have and what makes it unique? Well, as I mentioned before, it is a dynamic microphone, which means it doesn't require a power source to run. And this type of mic is typically well suited to capturing loud, strong sounds like drums. As a side note, if you'd like to learn more about the differences between various types of microphones, I'll link a previous video I made called Buying Your First Microphone because I go into more detail about that topic there. When I first got my hands on the D19C, one of the very first things I noticed was that it does not use the typical 3-pin XLR connector that most of us are so used to today. It does have a 3-pin connector, but it's a locking DIN connector. So you insert it and then twist a locking mechanism into place. So if you want to use this microphone with most modern interfaces, you are going to need the correct cable or an adapter. If you're used to using vintage gear, then you're already familiar with compatibility issues like this. But if you are new to vintage equipment, then it is something to keep in mind. If we take a closer look at the body of this microphone, we can see rectangular slots running down the side. Now, these might look familiar to you if you've ever used a very popular podcasting mic, the RE20 from Electrovox. They're very famous for a technology called variable D technology. Using these slots, it supposedly reduces the proximity effect. Just in case you don't know what that is, essentially, when you speak into a microphone, the closer you get, the bassier the sound. And sometimes you want to reduce that effect. So essentially, these slots are AKG's version of the variable D technology, and they are intended to reduce the proximity effect, so they're not just cosmetic. An additional feature of this microphone is this little collar here at the base of the capsule. Apparently, this was a common feature for dynamic microphones from this time period, but essentially I can twist this collar to toggle between modes. This particular model has music mode and speech mode, which is essentially just either activating or deactivating a high-pass filter. If you don't know what a high-pass filter is, it's just a fancy pants way of saying that we're telling the microphone which frequency range it should listen to. So when the high-pass filter is off, when it's deactivated, this microphone is listening to and recording its entire frequency range. However, if we want to narrow that frequency range a little bit, we can switch the high-pass filter on by simply turning this little collar here, and then the microphone's going to listen to fewer of those low-end frequencies. So we can shape our sound during recording by using different modes. In case you'd like to hear what that sounds like, I pre-recorded some footage, so I'll insert that here.
These days, a chicken leg is a rare dish. These days, a chicken leg is a rare dish. Rice is often served in round bowls. Rice is often served in round bowls. The juice of lemons makes a fine punch. The juice of lemons makes a fine punch.
So what was my experience with this microphone? Well, the music I first fell in love with as a kid was from the 1960s. So it was really exciting for me to actually get to use a piece of gear from that time period. And my student who lent me this microphone is actually selling it. So I have the opportunity to own my very own first piece of vintage gear. After extensive testing, I know for a fact that it works. So the question is, will I keep it? And spoiler alert, the answer is no. I won't be keeping this microphone, but that is in no way a reflection of its quality. It simply doesn't suit the work that I do right now. And so now I think is a good time to discuss how to decide if a good piece of gear is good for you. When considering how to spend our hard-earned money, I think it's always wise to look at the context in which we will be using the tools we're purchasing. So let's take a look at the context here. My studio currently features a very high quality but quite minimalistic setup. Even though I run a professional studio, I'm only recording myself here, and the great majority of the recordings I do are of my own voice. After testing out this microphone, I feel like it's better suited to larger scale productions or band recordings, and here is my reasoning. When I record my voice for my own productions or for my customers, whether it's vocals for a song or general voiceover work, I like to deliver files with as much detail and range as possible. And the reason for that is because it's much easier to subtract frequencies from a recording during post-production than it is to add frequencies that simply aren't in the recording to begin with. Because the D19 is a dynamic mic, it just doesn't record as much detail or as broad a frequency range as most of my condenser mics. I used this microphone to record a cover version of the song Demons by the band Guster. I did a lot of backing vocals on that track, and when I was singing them, I noticed that a lot of the tricks that I normally use as a background singer just didn't work. One of the things I like to do if I'm doing a backing track with a lot of different vocals is I try to vary the textures in my voice for different vocal lines just to add a little bit of depth and some interest into the tracks. But this microphone just didn't hear those differences. For example, sometimes I'll try to inject more air into a certain vocal so it sounds more like a cello. And this mic was just completely oblivious. It just was like, I don't hear a difference. And I was like, this is weird. So I had to do different things. Instead of injecting more air, I had to inject more hollowness. It was a very strange experience. Fun, interesting, educational, but not necessarily great for production. I was also planning to do my typical mic test with this D19. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that as soon as I get my hands on a new mic, the first thing I want to do is test it out. And the way I test it out as a singer and a musician is I just want to sing into it. I want to play guitar into it. I want to play percussion into it. And then I want to listen to a dry mix of it just to get the vibes of the mic. And by dry mix, I mean there's no EQ, no compression, no reverb. It's just the sound as the microphone heard it, mixed together, and that's it. And that's what I upload here onto YouTube. So if you've ever seen one of my mic tests, it's a completely dry track. Now, some people are like, no, I hear compression. Yeah, that's because YouTube adds compression. I have no control over that. I give it to you as dry as I can. But when I'm testing out a mic, I don't want to have any effects on it. But I could not bring myself to do that with the D19 because I just was not getting enough detail to make the recording process fun. So I had to add some compression and some EQ just to have fun while recording this mic. And so I could not bring myself to force you guys to listen to a dry mix of the song because I just felt like it fell a little bit flat. Just to kind of show you what I mean, in this video, I will show you an excerpt of the song. First, it'll be a dry mix, and then I'll show you the wet mix just so you can hear the difference.
When I speak across my fingers, will you know you've been deceived? I'll find the need to be the demon. A demon cannot be heard.
Now, I am fully aware that a wet versus dry mix difference can be just as dramatic, if not even more so, with a condenser mic. But my point is basically that when you're using a condenser mic, your starting point just has more detail. You don't necessarily need as much. At least when you're doing like, kind of earthy acoustic recordings like I do, you just don't need as much help. So why do I think the D19 would be good for larger scale productions? Well, aside from the fact that dynamic mics are typically good at recording loud, powerful instruments, if you are recording a song with multiple instruments that have overlapping frequencies. So you've got acoustic and electric guitar, keyboards, strings, horns, vocals, percussion, like all of those things can like all share frequency ranges. And so if you want a really clear mix, one of the ways you can do that is by making sure the arrangement is clear. But another way you can do that is by kind of cutting out some frequencies from the get-go during recording. That'll just make the mixing process easier. So in that context, I could imagine that, an acoustic guitar serves a different function. Like when I play acoustic guitar and sing, the acoustic guitar is like the only other instrument. So like you want to hear detail and you want to hear a lot of color there. But a lot of times in like a larger band context, an acoustic guitar is just a rhythmic element that adds a little bit of color. So you don't want a whole lot of detail in that guitar track because you don't want it detracting from maybe, the other instruments that you're supposed to be focusing on. So in that context, I could imagine that using a D19 could be really useful because you're going to hear the rhythm, you're going to hear the notes, but you're not necessarily going to get the same amount of detail. So I imagine that it could make the mixing process a lot easier. But that's not what I do here, so it doesn't necessarily work for me. As of this point in time, my productions are very minimalistic, and the part that I play in other productions, it's important that I deliver as much detail and richness as I can in my recordings, and that's just not where this particular mic shines. I could imagine in future if I were to run a larger studio and do larger scale productions that having a mic like this would be great to have, but considering the current work that I do, it's just not necessary. So I'm very glad I got to spend some time with it. I had a lot of fun recording with it and making these videos. It taught me a lot. But by the time you see this video, this microphone and I will have parted ways. And that, my friends, was my not so brief but spectacular take on the AKG D19C dynamic microphone. If you enjoyed this video, then I hope you'll consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. Other than that, if you are still here, wow, you made it! Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you learned something, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope that I'll see you again soon for some more Tech Talk time.
See